What if the massive walls, the concrete floors, the heavy roofs of the buildings you walk through every single day don't actually exist to your eyes?
It sounds crazy when you say it like that.
I know, I know. But our mission today for this is to uncover the invisible material that actually builds our visual world, which is light. I mean, if you take an intricately designed wall and place it in absolute pitch black darkness, it just simply does not visually exist.
Right, it is literally nothing.
It's nothing more than an abstract idea at that point.
Yeah, it remains entirely conceptual until illumination actually interacts with its surface. And that dynamic interaction is, well, it's the fundamental premise of our sources today.
So it's not just a philosophical thing.
Not at all. The research argues powerfully that in architectural drawing, just like in the physical built environment around you, light is the sole catalyst that gives form its visibility. I mean, we tend to think of architecture as just an arrangement of solid materials, right?
It's some order. Yeah.
Exactly. But it is fundamentally an art of illumination.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what these sources reveal is that light isn't just some pretty atmospheric decoration you add at the very end.
Right, like an Instagram filter or something.
Yes, exactly. Just to make a presentation board look nice for a client. It is the active structural material that gives a drawing its actual legibility.
It does all the heavy lifting.
It really does.
Yeah.
And to truly understand how architects manipulate this invisible material on a flat piece of paper, we have to start at the absolute foundation, like how the human eye actually perceives three-dimensional form in the real world.
Because the exact same physical geometry changes dramatically based entirely on the behavior of light. The source text gives this brilliant thought experiment, actually.
Oh, I love this part. Walk us through it.
So imagine a room lit entirely by one narrow vertical side window. The light just scrapes across the floor and it leaves these deep pockets of darkness in the corners. It feels very specific, right?
Yeah, very moody, kind of dramatic.
Right? Now take that exact same room, same dimensions, same furniture, everything, but seal the side window and open up a massive overhead skylight.
Boom, totally different vibe.
Exactly. The space is now flooded from above. The physical bricks and the drywall, they haven't moved a single inch, but the spatial experience is completely transformed.
I mean, or think about walking down a narrow city alley. At noon, the sun is beating straight down, casting these really hard lines and making the space feel, I don't know, almost clinical.
Very exposed.
Exposed, yeah. But at dusk, that exact same alley feels enclosing, moody, maybe even a little dangerous.
Yeah, you might walk a little faster.
Right. The physical boundaries are identical, but the architecture is telling a completely different story just because of the sun. So how does an architect actually put that shifting reality onto a static page?
What's fascinating here is that the study of light in architectural drawing is essentially the study of form itself. You do not perceive its shape just because its boundary lines are drawn on a paper.
Right, the lines aren't enough.
Not at all. If you draw a three-dimensional cube, your brain only recognizes it as a solid object.
Yeah.
Because one face of that cube is rendered brighter than the other faces.
Because if all three visible faces of that cube were lit with the exact same brightness,
Yeah.
your brain would just register this flat, weird hexagon sitting on paper. There would be absolutely no illusion of depth.
Which is why understanding the direction of the light source is the architect's very first critical decision.
They have to pick where the sun is before they do anything else.
Exactly. I mean, a round column only reads as a cylinder because the light wraps across its curved surface, right?
Right.
It creates this smooth, rolling gradient from bright to dark.
Oh, that makes sense.
And a deep window opening only looks recessed into a thick masonry wall because its inner surfaces are kept darker than the exterior wall plane. The geometry is clarified purely through contrast.
And the sources break down how manipulating that direction completely changes the visual data you receive. Like if an architect uses side lighting, where they are raking the light across a surface from a really low angle.
It highlights everything.
It does. It emphasizes every bit of texture and relief. It shows you the roughness of the stone or the depth of the mortar joints.
Yeah.
But if they use top lighting, just dropping the light straight down, it creates these really dramatic pools of illumination on the floor.
And it pulls your eye upward.
Right. Emphasizing
Right.
the sheer verticality of the space.
But we also have to consider the risk of front lighting, which is super tricky.
Oh, right. Like when the light is behind the viewer.
Yeah, if the light source is positioned directly behind the viewer, hitting the building straight on, it's like a deer caught in headlights. It just flattens all the surfaces.
Because you can't see the shadows anymore.
Exactly. The shadows are cast directly behind the objects, completely out of our line of sight. And that robs the brain of the visual cues it needs to measure depth.
But then backlighting is the opposite, right? It places the light behind the building, which throws the entire facade into shadow and produces these incredibly strong graphic silhouettes.
Yeah, it's a very powerful tool.
So, okay, if light is the tool that shows us the surface of a building, which shows us the depth, and that brings us to shadow. But I actually have to jump in here and push back on the text for a second.
Oh, let's hear it.
Well, isn't a shadow literally just a void? Like it's just the absence of light. Yet the source material insists on calling shadow an active spatial condition.
Right.
What does that actually mean in practice? Because it sounds like architect jargon.
It does sound a bit academic, I'll give you that.
Mhm.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, treating a shadow as merely dark filler or just an empty void is a massive conceptual trap.
Really? How so?
Well, in architecture, shadow is the connective tissue that makes a 3D space legible. Think about walking through a massive stone arcade, you know, the kind with those heavy arches repeating down a long corridor.
Like in an old European cloister or something?
Exactly. The deep pockets of darkness under those arches aren't just empty space, they are visual anchors.
Okay, I think I see where you're going.
They tell your brain about the immense thickness of the stone. Without that shadow, a drawing of that arcade is just a confusing web of flat intersecting lines.
Ah, so it's not a void. It's actually the glue holding the 3D space together on the page.
That is a perfect way to put it. Yes, it's the glue.
That makes total sense. And the text actually splits this glue into two highly specific categories, which I found fascinating. The first is form shadow.
Right, the form shadow.
This is the shadow that lives directly on the object itself, specifically on the surface that is physically turning away from the light source.
Form shadow is basically the communicator of volume.
Like the curve of a column.
Yeah, it is the smooth, dimming gradation you see sweeping across a curved, vaulted ceiling, for example, or the darkened interface of a doorway, or even the dim underside of a wooden stair tread.
It tells you about the object's inherent shape, whether it is sharply angled or softly curved.
Exactly. And then the second type is cast shadow.
Right. which is the shadow that one object physically throws outward onto a completely separate surface.
And this is where the brain really does its subconscious calculations.
Oh, absolutely. Cast shadows act as spatial anchors, right?
Ah.
They're generally sharper and highly directional.
Yes. Think about when a projecting balcony casts a hard, dark shadow onto the wall, say 10 feet below it. Your brain uses the length of that shadow to instantly calculate exactly how far that balcony sticks out into the air.
Wow, yeah. We don't even realize we're doing the math.
We just do it instinctively. When a handrail casts a shadow onto the steps below, it defines the negative space between the metal and the stone. So form shadows tell you the shape of the object, but cast shadows tell you exactly how that object occupies the space around it.
Okay, so we have light hitting the building to show us the surface, and we have shadows tricking our brain into calculating the volume and depth. But a drawing isn't just, blinding white light and pitch black shadow.
Oh, that would be pretty hard to look at.
Right. It requires a massive spectrum of gray values in between to actually guide your eye through the image. And this brings us to tone.
Tone is so important.
Tone is essentially the relative lightness or darkness of any given area on the page.
Tone is the structural tool of perception. It is how an architect builds a hierarchy of information.
Because a drawing with absolutely no tonal variation is just a flat schematic.
Right, just a wireframe. And a drawing where everything is shaded darkly and randomly becomes this chaotic, unreadable mess.
I was actually thinking about tone like a film director using camera focus.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like when you are watching a movie and the camera is sharply focused on the protagonist's face right in the foreground, but the entire background is totally blurred out.
The bokeh effect.
Exactly. The director is literally forcing you to look at what matters. They are organizing your attention. Tone does exactly that in an architectural drawing. It tells your eye what is immediate, what is receding into the distance, what is bathed in primary light, and what is secondary.
Applying that to an actual drawing technique, think about the cut elements in a section drawing.
A section drawing being when you slice a building vertically to show its interior.
Right, exactly. When you slice it open, if you render those solid, slice-through walls in the absolute darkest, heaviest tone, you instantly anchor the structure for the viewer.
It gives it weight.
Yes, your eye registers that heavy black as solid earth and masonry. Meanwhile, you can use a very soft, pale tone for the background elements, and that supports the main building without competing for your attention.
It creates a sense of atmospheric recession. As a large interior space gets further away from you, the contrast softens, the darks get a little lighter, and the lights get a little dimmer.
The air itself seems to have thickness.
Yeah, but you know what I found really surprising in the sources?
What's
It was the emphasis on the exact opposite of darkness, the sheer power of nothing.
Ah, yes, the white space.
The strategic preservation of white space. Leaving the paper untouched, or using the absolute lightest digital value, is apparently an incredibly aggressive compositional tool.
It is a highly deliberate choice. White space is not just the part of the drawing the architect simply forgot to shade.
Right. If you render a heavy, dim, tonally rich drawing of a massive stone wall, and you leave one single narrow doorway entirely blank,
Just pure white paper.
just pure white, your eye snaps to that doorway instantly. It becomes a beacon.
It carries just as much architectural weight and meaning as the deepest, darkest shadow on the page.
Or even leaving a bright strip of untouched pavement running right across the foreground of a shaded building. It creates this undeniable rhythm.
Which naturally bridges into how these varied tonal values communicate the physical reality of the building. Because tone doesn't just show us where objects are located, it tells us how those objects feel.
It communicates materiality. Yes. Because if tone tells us where an object is, how do we know what it feels like to touch? Light interacts with every single physical material differently based on its molecular structure.
And an architect has to capture that physics on the page.
Take concrete, for example. Concrete is incredibly porous. On a microscopic level, its surface is like a jagged mountain range.
Full of little craters.
Right. So when light hits it, the beams scatter in a million different directions, which is why it looks so matte, diffuse, and heavy on the page. It just absorbs the illumination.
Now contrast that with metal or glass. Metal has a dense, smooth structure, so it reflects light uniformly. And that creates incredibly sharp, blinding highlights and extreme tonal
It's
contrast.
very crisp.
Yeah. And glass might transmit the light, reflect the surrounding environment, or nearly disappear entirely depending on the angle you look at it.
What about natural materials, like wood?
Well, wood absorbs light but reveals a subtle, warm grain. Vegetation, like trees and bushes, scatters light irregularly, creating a soft, dappled effect.
And a skilled architect implies all these physical textures, just using tonal behavior, rather than painstakingly drawing every individual brick or leaf.
Nobody has time to draw every single leaf.
No, absolutely not. And beyond the physical texture, that tonal behavior is how emotion actually becomes visible. It establishes the atmosphere of the space.
The text gives some incredibly evocative examples of this.
Oh, the chapel example. Picture a drawing of a heavy masonry chapel. If the architect uses a concentrated bright shaft of top light dropping down into deep dark side shadows, the space instantly feels contemplative.
It forces a sense of quiet.
But if you render a wide courtyard using very soft, low contrast tones filled with gentle, diffused tree shadows, the space communicates openness and calm.
It feels breezy. Alternatively, drawing a tightly enclosed stairwell with heavy dark tones pierced by just one harsh diagonal slash of light.
Very noir.
Very noir. It creates a space that feels deeply theatrical, monumental, perhaps even intimidating. The emotional resonance of a drawing relies entirely on orchestrating that light and tone.
And that ties directly into the dimension of time. Because a building doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It exists at a specific moment. The light is constantly moving.
This raises an important question, though. How does capturing a specific moment change our relationship to the architecture?
Because architecture is never perceived outside of time.
Never. And light is the ultimate indicator of the clock.
If you render a building with very low horizontal light that stretches these long, dramatic cast shadows across the ground, you are immediately dropping the viewer into early morning or late afternoon.
It gives the building a lived-in cinematic context.
Yeah, if the shadows are short, tucked tightly underneath the roof overhangs, it's obviously high noon.
And if the tonal transitions are incredibly smooth, with no hard cast shadows anywhere, the drawing implies an overcast, cloudy day.
And if you rely on extremely high contrast, pitch black exteriors with glowing bright tones radiating from the window apertures, it unmistakably suggests evening.
Injecting time gives a drawing immense narrative power. It proves to the viewer that the building is not just a static object sitting on a pedestal somewhere.
It's alive.
It is an environment continuously altered by shifting natural conditions.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Why do architects actually go through all this trouble?
That's the big question.
Right. Mastering the physics of light, calculating cast shadows, simulating microscopic material textures. Drawing isn't just about making a beautiful rendering to hang in a gallery.
Far from it. It is a highly functional tool.
It is a laboratory.
Yeah.
It's where the architect tests reality before anyone spends $10 million pouring actual concrete.
Drawing is the primary engine of design thinking. Through rigorous tonal studies, an architect is essentially testing their own hypotheses.
Like what?
Well, they can evaluate a space and ask, will this massive overhead skylight I've designed actually create a beautiful ethereal glow, or is it going to just flood the floor with harsh glare and completely overheat the room?
Or does this long, narrow hallway feel appropriately solemn and quiet? Or is it just claustrophobic and depressing?
Right. Does this courtyard get enough bounced, reflected light to actually keep the vegetation alive?
They have to figure all this out on the page. And architects use wildly different mediums in this laboratory, which totally changes the type of light they can explore.
Oh, the tools dictate everything.
You really do. I always think of graphite, a standard pencil, like a scalpel. It allows for incredibly precise, subtle tonal gradations. It's perfect for studying soft light and exact geometry.
That is a brilliant analogy. And if graphite is a scalpel, charcoal is a sledgehammer.
Oh man, charcoal gets everywhere too.
It really does.
Yeah.
But charcoal provides these rich, aggressive blacks and thick textures. The physical friction of dragging charcoal across the tooth of the paper creates a moody, atmospheric image that is just unparalleled for exploring intense emotion.
And then you have ink and wash, which kind of balances the crisp, rigid precision of pen lines with the fluid, unpredictable softness of water.
Which is incredibly hard to master.
I can imagine. And obviously, nowadays we have digital software.
Of course.
Digital tools give you absolute mathematical control over layering and tonal values. But the fundamental principles don't change at all.
No, the computer won't do the thinking for you.
Exactly. Whether you are holding a piece of compressed charcoal or using a top-tier rendering engine, you still have to manually construct the visual hierarchy. The computer won't magically know what you want the viewer to actually focus on.
Which is exactly why architecture students often struggle when they first attempt this.
Oh, the learning curve is real.
Very real. Applying these principles requires a complete rewiring of how you see the world. One of the most prevalent mistakes is shading a drawing without first establishing a definitive light source.
Oh, I used to do this all the time in art classes. I'd have a drawing and I'd just start aggressively smudging pencil into all the interior corners.
Just darkening the edges.
Yeah. Because I thought it made the space look, moody and architectural. I wasn't tracking where the sun was at all. I was just making the corners dark.
And how did that turn out?
Terrible. It didn't look moody. It just looked like dirty paper.
Mhm.
It completely confused the geometry.
Ah, yes. The classic dirty corner technique.
It's a rite of passage, I think.
It really is. But it results in a drawing that feels visually contradictory because your brain is receiving conflicting data about depth.
Right.
Another frequent error is rendering every single cast shadow with the exact same heavy, dark tone.
Oh, and that flattens the image. So
Completely. It makes it look like a cartoon.
Mhm.
Or falling into the trap of over-rendering.
spending hours drawing every single brick.
Every brick, every wood grain, every leaf, until the overall structural form of the building is entirely lost in just a sea of microscopic texture.
So how do you actually train your brain out of that? The source material says the ultimate unbeatable teacher is pure observation.
Yes, you have to leave the studio, go out into the physical world, sit down, and actually sketch real spaces.
There's absolutely no substitute for it.
Mm.
Sketching from life just shatters the textbook formulas in your head.
It does. When you sit in a real room and stare at a white wall, you quickly realize it is almost never just one uniform value of white.
Never.
You begin to notice the subtleties, like how the edge of a cast shadow is incredibly sharp when it's close to the object, but as it stretches further away, the edge actually softens and blurs into the ambient light.
And you start noticing reflected light. You see how light bounces off a bright floor and actually illuminates the dark underside of a table.
Exactly.
Sketching real spaces forces you to ground your drawings in actual human perception,
Right.
rather than relying on visual cliches you memorize from a textbook somewhere.
It builds deep spatial and emotional intelligence. Mastering light, shadow, and tone means moving beyond merely representing an object's physical dimensions.
It transforms the drawing into a true model of human perception.
A single, accurately placed shadow can explain the complex geometry of a sweeping roofline far more effectively than 20 intersecting lines ever could.
So what does this all actually mean for you, listening right now? Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, the core takeaway from the sources is pretty clear. Light reveals the form, shadow provides the structural depth, and tone organizes the hierarchy and the mood.
Without them, architecture on a page is basically lifeless.
Lifeless. But more importantly, understanding this completely rewires how you view the physical world. In fact, take a second right now to just look around whatever room or space you are currently in.
Seriously, do it. Look closely at the corners. Look at exactly where the primary light source is hitting.
Find a form shadow. Maybe it's the smooth, darker side of a coffee mug on your desk or the dim fold of a curtain. Then look for a cast shadow, like the sharp geometric shape your chair is throwing onto the floor.
Notice the tonal hierarchy too. What is the brightest, most blown out white space in your vision right now? And what is the deepest, darkest void?
You are living inside a masterclass of composition, light, and tone at this exact second.
And this raises a final provocative thought to consider, one that extends even beyond the brilliant text we've unpacked today.
Ooh, leave us with something good.
Well, Throughout human history, our entire emotional and spatial experience of a building has been deeply tethered to its relationship with the natural movement of the sun. Light and shadow have anchored us in physical time and geographic space.
Right.
But as we move rapidly into the future, how might the very nature of architecture change as we increasingly rely on artificial screen-based environments to orient ourselves?
Oh, wow.
If the glowing flat screen eventually replaces the sunlit window as our primary source of illumination, how will that fundamentally alter the way we design form, curate mood, and experience our physical reality?
It really makes you wonder what the architectural drawings of the next century will even look like. Because at the end of the day, whether we're talking about a massive stone cathedral from 500 years ago or a high-tech smart home being built tomorrow, architecture is never just about the physical walls and floors.
No, it never is.
A wall without light is just an abstract idea. Until the light hits it, it's nothing but a drawing in the dark.